Hi, welcome back to this channel. I am the Spellsinger and this is my ongoing review of the fighting fantasy series of gamebooks. Now this review is going to bring you a quick look at this title and book number. I shall read the blurb to you and then we'll go through the plot, take a look at the game mechanics for this book and have a look at that adventure sheet. I'll run the artwork through this video and have a quick chat about that as it goes, and then I'll look at some of my own likes and dislikes for this one. And we'll touch on some fun facts maybe, and look at any errors that may have cropped up that may be of interest. And then I'll finish on a summary and score out of 10 for this entry. So yeah, this is title number 15. So the Rings of Kether. This is another sci-fi edition. And it came out in 1985, so it's still in that classic 1984-1985 region of gamebooks when they were king. The author is Andrew Chapman, so you remember he did the Space Assassin. He only wrote 3 books for this series, so this one is his second one. This one's a little bit stronger than Space Assassin in my opinion, but the best is yet to come. The cover artist here is Terry Oakes. He's done a really good job. Slightly odd looking character on the front there, but is definitely quite intriguing. But the internal art was by Nick Spender. So I'll run that through this video as we go. Now this one, I like this one. This is not a big fan favourite, but I quite like it, and it is different. The sci-fi books did struggle a little bit in this series of game books, but this one kind of has this like film noir feel to it, which I'll touch on later, and it can almost read like a kind of Philip K. Dick entry almost, if you squint, you know. But I quite like it. I think it's a good book, and I shall go into the reasons why. But first of all, let's read the blurb. So my copy, and this one basically says we've got corruption is rife in the the Alpha Cygni system, and the flow of the illicit narcotic Satophil-d has this is the drug, I guess, from the spaceports of the planet Kether has grown to enormous proportions. Several attempts have been made to crack the notorious drug ring of Kether with no success. Now the Galactic Federation has entrusted you with this dangerous undercover mission in this wild and lawless place. But will you succeed? Yeah, so there's the blurb. It gives you a little understanding of what weirdness we're going to get into in this particular adventure. But first of all, let's touch on the plot in a little bit more detail. So unlike your typical fighting fantasy game book, the story does take place as a science fiction, so it's part of the science fiction genre. The setting, I mean. So with you taking on the role of this narcotics officer, and you're seeking to break up a drug ring, so hence the title. As a kid, I always thought, embarrassingly, the rings were like to do with the planet, as in like the Saturn rings. I was quite naive, so so the ring is this drug ring which is located on this planet of Kether, and you are given like a reasonable kind of degree of information at the beginning as you travel between sort of various locations on the planet's surface, but not just the planet's surface. You're in orbit for some of this as well. There are moons, multiple paths to the final confrontation with the head of this crime ring. Now, the major element which distinguishes this book, this game book, from the others is basically in the series is this heavy skill rolling that you're doing throughout the adventure. It's required quite a lot throughout this book, more so than I would say many of the others, and in quick succession as well during the course of the adventure. It's interesting to play the detective for a change. In the adventure, like I say, it's almost like a Philip K. Dick feel, Blade Runner-esque almost, as you sort of follow leads, solve clues, and interrogate members of this drug ring. And at the heart, it's a sci-fi detective story. And so detective work is crucial in making this story exciting and engaging, which it does well. It could be better, but we'll get into that as we go. But that's the plot. It's pretty straightforward, but it does work quite nicely. Right, game mechanics and adventure sheet. Not too much change, but much like Freeway Fighter, which we just reviewed, this book has 3 different kinds of combat, So you've got melee combat, you've got gun combat and vehicle combat. In this case, obviously spaceships rather than vehicles, as was the case with Freeway Fighter. And it's all executed quite well. It's evenly balanced so that most players can sort of get through without too much trouble. This is one of the easier books to complete, I have to admit. The space battles, though, however, are absolutely deadly, as you would imagine they would be. So that's quite accurate. A low roll on your shield score is probably a death sentence on this one, but I'll get into that in a moment. There's really only one of these fights that you absolutely have to do. The space combat is quite rare, but there's only one that you really have to do, so it's not too bad. The rules are pretty solid here, and they feature the weapons strength. So this is a new mechanic, weapons strength, which is a 1d6 plus 6, and your shields for your ship as well, which is just a 1d6. So as with Freeway Fighter, the game also has like hand-to-hand combat for when you're out on land, projectile weapons, vehicle combat, which is obviously your ship-to-ship in this case. And yeah, this all works nicely to sort of add good variety to the adventure as you're reading through it. There was a replacement for provisions. We now have pep pills, which they give you 6 stamina instead of 4, so apart from the name and a little bit of an increase, there's no real difference there. But yeah, little bit of a change. There's a large amount of play that does not involve dice roll. So they're so used to rolling your stats and then just having battle after battle, but not so much in this adventure. In fact, it's possible to play through with minimal battles, so it's not too much dice rolling, which is a nice change. I think I managed a playthrough and barely touched the dice, since rolling the character stats. Barely touched them. So on another attempt, I think I got to the boss fight. There was only like maybe 1 or 2 combats leading up to that, and to that sort of final boss fight. So yeah, it's kind of odd, but kind of miss it after a while, but it's nice to have the variety. It's it's unusually refreshing, let's say, and you can feel that you can almost immerse yourself in the story far easier by not having to be broken up by all these combats all the time. Some of these books are combat heavy, but this one, not so much. Adventure sheet, yeah. Here's the adventure sheet. Now, it hasn't changed an awful lot. So you've got basically your skill, stamina, and luck. As normal, you've got your equipment and weapons. But on the right, you'll have the shields and your weapons strength for your ship. So that's where those 2 boxes populate. But underneath, you've got your smart missiles. So this is where you basically have any spaceship combat. You can launch these smart missiles. It's like an instant kill, but you only obviously have a select few. But a bit like the missiles from Freeway Fighter in some respects. Really useful. And then your pep pills and your money as well, which is quite useful. There's a funny thing about this adventure sheet. So you'll notice you've got your shields and weapon strength, but if you look, I didn't get that extra box for weapon strength. It was just this off. So as a kid, I was thinking, why have I not got a weapon strength box? But I got over that. Right. So yeah, that's pretty much the adventure sheet. So not wholly different, but nice to see a few little additional boxes in there. Artwork. Now, like I say, this was the only series, I think, that was illustrated by Nick Spender, who should have maybe been given a bit more of a chance, because I quite like his artwork. It reminds me of Starship Traveller with that kind of minimalistic look. There's a very metallic sort of monochrome look to his machinery and his sort of environment drawings, which I quite like. And they give them sort of that film noir that I mentioned, that kind of feel to it, that futuristic shine to everything. And that's his style, it seems to come across quite nice in this book. The backgrounds could be fairly basic, mostly line drawings, but I quite like it. I think it works. His people characters, they're not drawn in this way. They're more sort of conventional. They've got more of a conventional look, which adds life to sort of the character art, really. Nice to have art in 2 styles sometimes. That's quite rare, which is, lacking in consistency, but it does give like a contrast between like the human and the mechanical forms of art. I've got a favourite picture as always. This picture here looks like something out of John Carpenter's The Thing, with this weird sort of snake-like body and a weird head on coming out of the artwork coming at you. You know, I really like that image that kind of draws you in, comes out of the artwork at you as you're reading. It's a great picture, and it kind of sticks in my mind, you know, as one of the sort of better pieces of art that he came up with here. Right, likes and dislikes for this entry. I love the writing. It's really descriptive, and it's great at describing obviously all the thugs that show up in the bars and all the mechanics at the spaceports. It's a welcome diversion from the dungeons and all the caves that we've had so much in the past books. There's so much in this book, so it's still within 400 references as usual, but the number of places that is covered is amazing. I've got a list of them here, so I'm just going to rattle off. You've got warehouses, bars, spaceports. You've got the moon, another spaceport, another warehouse. You've got this apartment that you go to. There's a park. There's a car chase, so all this street chasing. There's a factory on an island and another factory in space. So it's really diverse. You're all over the place in this book, gathering clues as you go through the adventure. So lots of variety. What could have helped this was a little puzzle solving. Some need to access, when you get the evidence, to sort of be able to assess it yourself rather than just being moved along to the sort of the next clue. Yeah, a bit like Appointment with Fear, which we'll come to Appointment with Fear next in the next few books. But a bit like that, where you get a clue, you'll get a reference, but you need to know when to sort of move to that reference, judging on what you pick up in the story and what you pick up in the artwork. Maybe something a bit more like that. This just seems to be a little bit too easy, and I think as you're a detective, the kind of crime side and the solving of clues and riddles could have been upped slightly. Maybe even throw in a few red herrings, it would have been interesting. So for example, if you chase down the wrong person or you get caught out, you maybe face some kind of instant death unless you can solve a puzzle. Okay, fun facts. This book has 2 different successful endings, one of which is contained within, obviously, reference 400 as normal. And basically, in this book, planet Kether is in the Alpha Cygni system. And the term Alpha appears again in a book a bit later on called Spectral Stalkers, which is an absolute classic, and it's also partially set in space. That book is also partially set in space as well, so there's some similarities there. The central theme of that book is you have to hunt down the Alpha, which is this kind of globe item that allows you to travel through space-time. So yeah, there's a bit of a connection there. Different authors, but definitely a connection. The later edition of this book also renamed the pep pills and called them energy tablets. So possibly in an attempt to kind of avoid the illegal drug connotation. A bit weird though, given the plot is about, drug dealers. But yeah, there, a couple of fun facts for you. I also picked up a couple of errors in this one. One's a real game breaker, unfortunately. It was going so well, but yeah, there is a bit of a game breaker in this, so it'd be a good one to know about. So basically, the first one, not too bad. In the original edition, despite the claims on pages 7 and 12 at the beginning of the book, the adventure sheet does not feature that strength weapon strength section to add the score. And so yeah, obviously I suffer from that, but the later editions, they had it in there, so no big deal. The adventure sheet was corrected, like I say, but there's no mention also of having a spy ray prior to reference 333, where you're told to cross it off your equipment list. So you get busted when you arrive right at the start, and you get to a port and these sort of patrol guards, they seize this spy ray, but like I say, it's not in the background. So as a kid, I was always thinking, oh, I've either forgotten it or I've missed it or I need this spy ray, but no, it never existed. Bit weird. But yeah, the real game breaker for this one is in reference 346. Basically, one of the options leads you to reference 263, which makes no sense. The correct paragraph is 268. So yeah, you basically find this guy, you make a few decisions, but yeah, that is the real game breaker. It sends you to the completely wrong reference, which makes no sense. So there's the correct one. 268. So yeah, if you ever read it again, you can make a note of that and not fall foul to it. But I think it's on the Titanica website anyway. So right, let's give this book a summary and score out of 10. Generally, this one, like I say, was not a popular title, but I loved it. I thought it was a really good effort from our author, and I think you know, as a sort of standalone sci-fi adventure, Andrew Chapman, he did a good job with this one. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's a lot less disjointed than maybe people remember it. There are plenty of connections between sort of various parts of the plot and the setting, but you need to go through the book maybe a few times to actually catch them all, you know. But the structure is really different. It's quite different compared to a lot of the other fighting fantasy books that have come before, and certainly some that come after. Chapman, he said in an interview, actually, I've got written here, that he put a lot of planning into this book, and I think it shows. Of all the fighting fantasy books I've played, and I've played a lot, this book was a tough one to map out because it's so open world. So it's that linear path that we kind of get used to sometimes is not in this one. You know, it's just not there, which I think is quite refreshing as well. There are a lot of paths to victory. So yeah, Chapman, he did well to kind of link it all together as well as he did, without any sort of continuity errors or structural failures, aside from that one that we just mentioned in the errors. So that was the one structural failure that he did fall foul to, but you know, it happens. Sadly, for all of its neat structural innovation, it is light on the things that make these fighting fantasy books so enjoyable. Its open structure makes it one of the easier books to complete. The illustrations are quite competent, but a little bit unexciting at times. There's a lot of kind of spaceship and space pictures, which are a bit bland occasionally. The villains aren't described as much as they could be, except for Zara Gross, who's one of the lead villains in this book. The setting is kind of bland with a kind of mid-20th century sci-fi look that's been used before. The major exceptions, I think, to that is this part where you find these monks on asteroid C230, and their serpentine sort of space god is memorably weird. But it's also easy to miss that, and you know, it's kind of disconnected and very easily missed in your adventure. It's kind of on one of these routes that you wouldn't necessarily think to take. But yeah, a bit disconnected from the rest of the book. But overall, Rings of Kether is well designed. It has it's well structured, and perhaps technically more competent than a bunch of some of the other books that came before. But it's just lacking that spark that made a lot of these books unforgettable. There's much to recommend though in this book, but the plot is the real strong point for me. It's a lot of fun, and you really do get the impression of being this intergalactic kind of Blade Runner type figure as you sort of gather the clues and information by being sort of stealthy and quizzing various characters that you meet along the way. You also have this expense account, so that's your money on the adventure sheet, and you can bribe information, you know, from people, assuming that you offer the right money in return. And the more you progress, obviously, the more notorious you become, the more attention you bring to yourself, and that obviously puts you in more danger. This adds to the atmosphere as well, and draws you into sort of like that character storyline that's so classic with like film noir, being sort of transplanted into like this space environment. And then the plot is logical, and there are numerous possible routes, like I say, that you can take, not this classic linear path that Sir Ian seems to like, and it kind of can detract you from the playability of most fighting fantasy books if you're just stuck on this one true path all the time. But being able to explore is always a lot more fun, certainly to me anyway. There is scope for replaying. The last ability of this book is quite high, I've always found, because of the different routes. And so added to this is the fact that you are given a certain amount of sort of RPG style freedom, which makes you feel like a guided, less like a guided story and more like an actual game. The final touch with the sort of directional plotting is that there are two endings, like I mentioned. So two ways to win, which is quite nice. You can either bring the enemy in sort of dead by completely destroying the entire asteroid and thereby destroying the operation. Or you can bring them in alive just by sort of outgunning them and making arrests. So that's quite a nice thing to do. So depending on what sort of person you are, you can either destroy it or bring them into justice. Overall, the pace of this book is fast, and there's no real sort of dull parts to break up the flow. The only real downside is when you finally come up against the drug sort of producing headquarters. There isn't all that much there for what is described as a kind of hive of illicit drug dealing. And Blaster Babbitt, the villain, the head honcho himself, he's a bit of a letdown. You know, it takes very little to kind of beat his tricks, and his stats are quite low for a head honcho final boss as well. So it was a bit of an anticlimax at the end when you do discover that the evil bloke, also on the cover, is not the guy you're looking for. I don't know who he is, to be honest. I think he's one of Blaster Babbitt's henchmen, but I don't really know. You'd think, usually with these books, the cover is depicting like a big event or a main character. But put a comment if you know who this guy is. I think he's a henchman that shows up briefly in the story, but I don't really know, to be honest. Yeah. So yeah, there's a good amount of dialogue, so that's really great. It's nicely written, adding to that noir-ish detective feel. The flavour and atmosphere is added to the sci-fi theme by sort of the inclusion of the ship displays, the countdowns, and all this is like a really welcome touch, if you like, that kind of nostalgic sci-fi genre. However, there's a common criticism of Chapman's writing. His prose is it can be very blunt, and with all his instant deaths paragraphs, they can leave you a bit mystified. They're very short and to the point, so sometimes you're sort of left a bit confused as to how it actually ended. But worst of all, Chapman is known for sort of wasting paragraphs, which is like the cardinal sin, right? Yeah, so this might be sort of designed to maintain the pace, possibly, you know, these short, sharp paragraphs, but maybe it could have been just as urgent feeling if there were less paragraphs, you know, a bit like Starship Traveller, which was about 380 references, I think it was. So this probably could have got away with 380 references. We know that Chapman likes to fill out his books a little with Space Assassin, but there was a legitimate reason for that one. So can't really blame that this time. So a bit weird. Similar, some references merely list your options before you move on to another entry. So, you know, you'll get to a point that say, oh, move to this reference, you go there, and it literally just says, oh, these are the options, which one do you want? There's no real descriptive work. So it's strange. He goes from really descriptive to nondescript. So, yeah. Could be just a bit lazy at times, maybe, but it leaves you feeling a little bit shortchanged. But overall, this one, I did enjoy it. It was great. But with all the issues and everything else, and when you compare it to a lot of the other books, and even some of the sci-fi books, I probably would only give it a 6 out of 10. Yeah, I think a 6 out of 10 for this one. Right, yeah, that's the review for Rings of Kether. It's a good entry. The next book I'm going to do is going to be also by Andrew Chapman. So book 16 is Seas of Blood, and it's his final book, and it's a really classic. I think he'd finally gotten the hang of this, and he really goes for it with Seas of Blood. So that'll be the next book I'm going to do. So I hope you catch that one. I hope you like this one. If you did like it, maybe give it a thumbs up, but bung some comments in there, because it's always good to hear from you guys and any thoughts you have on this book or even some of the future books. Anything you want me to cover, I'm happy to do it. Maybe hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next review.